Hey everyone, Ewan from What Culture Horror here, and if you've been keeping up with all things movie over the last month, then you'll probably have caught that the latest Exorcist film, The Exorcist Believer, hasn't done too well at the box office or with critics. The film, which takes a similar sort of requel approach to the mythology in the same way 2018's Halloween did, brings back original Exorcist cast member Ellen Burstyn as Chris MacNeil to tell a new story of two children who seemingly become possessed after going missing for several weeks in the woods. Believer is meant to be part one of a whole trilogy, and it's received quite a drubbing from critics, landing a paltry 22% on Rotten Tomatoes and grossing only $108 million at the global box office. The latter sum may seem respectable given the movie's reported $30 million budget, but it's a middling return that will ensure it just about limps into the breaking even category. So, what's gone wrong? When it was announced in 2021 that Blumhouse would be resurrecting the Exorcist franchise with Halloween trilogy director David Gordon Green at the helm, alarm bells went off pretty quickly for me. Not because Gordon Green's Halloween movies were bad per se, the 2018 entry was largely well received, only to be followed by two polarizing sequels, but rather that making an Exorcist film without its creator, the late William Peter Blatty, who passed away in 2017 at the age of 89, should have been a non-starter. Blatty authored The Exorcist in 1971 and adapted it for the screen to be directed by the late William Friedkin 2 years later, telling a uniquely personal story that reckoned with his own Catholic faith and arrived at an equally personal conclusion, that if the devil exists, then God must too. The story was inspired by a reported account of demonic possession that took place in 1949, an account Blatty felt was an affirmation of divinity rather than something that should dispirit the idea of faith itself. This reconciliation is the driving force behind The Exorcist, which sees conflicted priest Damien Karras already struggling with his own crisis of faith when confronted with the possession of Regan MacNeil. It's only in the demise of Father Lancaster Merrin and the looming death of Regan that Karras finds the strength to re-embrace his faith and make a noble sacrifice, tumbling to his death, but in essence ascending to heaven. That element of theological strife and eventual conciliation becomes even more pronounced in the version you've never seen, which restores a sequence Blatty was desperate for Friedkin to include in the original theatrical release, where Merrin and Karras discuss the purpose of evil. As overall Exorcist authority Mark Kermode eloquently puts it, it isn't about the girl, it's about everyone else in the house, it's about the priest. Blatty would revisit these same themes years later with Legion, a sequel to The Exorcist that he also directed for the screen in 1990. While it has taken some time for The Exorcist 3 to be reappraised as a truly great horror film, for my mind the greatest horror sequel ever made, when taken together with Friedkin's seminal original, everything that has needed to be said about this story has been said. Try telling that to these films though. And yeah, this is where The Exorcist Believer's problems really start. Directed by Green, who co-developed the story alongside Halloween scribes Danny McBride and Scott Teems, alongside new collaborator Peter Sattler, Believer is, by all accounts, a typification of every boring conversation that has ever been had about The Exorcist. Said conversations have historically tended to relitigate whether Friedkin's film is worthy of its scariest movie of all time tagline. The Exorcist is scary, of course, but the issue is that the mythology that has been built around the film is largely focused on that scare and shock element, and that seems to be where Believer has sourced its entire understanding of Blatty's story from. This failure to grasp the soul of the text is exacerbated by Believer's mostly reiterative approach. It lifts the same structure from Friedkin's film, concluding with a grand exorcism sequence, but without any of the heart that was there in its progenitor. Equally as bad is how Green fumbles at the requel tropes he established with 2018's Halloween, pointlessly bringing back Burstyn's Chris like she's a Laurie Strode-esque figure, before removing her from the film unceremoniously towards the end. Such a move may have played better 5 years ago, but since Halloween we've had Scream, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and Candyman to name just 3. All of which brought back characters or cast members from previous installments to maintain franchise legacies. With Believer, this approach now feels more formulaic than ever before, right on down to Green & Co. planning a trilogy the same way they did with their Halloween movies. The other issue here, though, is that while The Exorcist maintains a legacy as being the greatest horror movie of all time, both the series and the exorcism genre as a whole have seen diminishing returns in the 50 years since the first film's release. Of the now 6 installments in the Exorcist franchise, only 2 are legitimately great, and one of those 2, the Blatty-directed Exorcist 3, was initially met with a tepid response from both audiences and critics. Blatty lobbied hard at the time for the film not to carry the Exorcist title and to instead use the name Legion like his novel, mainly due to the fact there was no exorcism originally in the book or the initial script, but also due to The Exorcist 2 going down as one of the worst films ever made, and thus toxifying The Exorcist as a title. Blatty was conscious of this in 1990, 33 years ago, and claimed that studio executives admitted to him after The Exorcist 3's release that research indicated The Exorcist titling was in fact having a negative effect on its audience lore. Not that it mattered though, as the same mistake was repeated twice again in the 2000s, and now once more with The Exorcist Believer. While there have been successful possession and Exorcist-style films since Friedkin's original, they have proven few and far between. The Exorcist has a legendary reputation, but it seemingly hasn't been enough to overcome the glut of bad genre entries, and for a sequel to thusly cash in that credit. But all this comes back to the biggest issue with Believer, and that is that it should never have been made. It may have been the scares that made The Exorcist a phenomenon to begin with, but it has endured, I would argue, because of the theology that was inexorably tied to Blatty's own relationship with his faith. This is something that fails to register with Believer on the most profound level, ensuring its status as the most insipid entry of the requel era, as well as one that, quite simply, never stood a chance in the first place. And yeah, that was our look at The Exorcist Believer and why it failed. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, if you could toss us a like and a subscribe, I promise I won't do my creepy spider walk thing down your stairs when you switch off the video. Either way, I've been Ewan, thanks for watching What Culture Horror, and I'll hopefully see you next time. Bye.